Welcome, everybody, to the Jim Masters Show, entertainment, lifestyle, variety, celebrity talk show series. Hope you guys are doing well. It's so cool to have you here from all around the world. We thank you for watching our show and for all the love and support, following us on our social media as well at Jim Masters TV on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And thanks for all the great comments. We appreciate everybody who's clicking like on our episodes and dropping comments in the comments section. And just having a good time with us. We've been doing hundreds and hundreds of shows. I say it at the beginning of every show, hundreds of episodes, so much content for all of you. And I hope you guys are enjoying it. We're very interactive, so you can let us know. If you'd like to comment during the show, just subscribe to our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, and you can actually comment right now while the show is on in our JMS Lovely chat room. We've got a chat room available for all of our viewers. When you subscribe to the channel, which costs nothing, you can actually chat. It's a bonus. It's a gift from us to you for our subscribers to our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. You can comment, say hello to one another, and say hello to us during the course of the show. Hope you guys are doing well from wherever you're watching. We say hello to everybody. We've got a terrific audience all across the United States. We are based here on the East Coast of the U.S., in the Northeast, in the New York tri-state area, along the southern New England coast between New York and Boston. That's where JMS comes from. And we've got an incredible audience in the U.S. We welcome you and our neighbors to the north in Canada and friends in Mexico, throughout North America, South America as well. We say hello to everybody. We have viewers that watch in Brazil and Peru and all over Venezuela. It's extraordinary. We love it. And also Argentina. And we say hello to everybody watching us throughout Europe. We have a lot of viewers that discover us from Europe and watch from Europe. And let's see, Africa, Australia, New Zealand. It's extraordinary where we hear from. We get emails. We get all kinds of cool hellos from folks that are watching from all around the world. Asia as well, wherever you are. We welcome you. India, we welcome you and thank you for stopping by the show. We got an extraordinary guest who has been, not only a prolific columnist and editor, reporter, and photographer. He's based in Nashville, Tennessee, but he's a brilliant author as well. And he's got a new book out, which is really, really cool. We're welcoming Tim Ghianni to the show, award-winning author, reporter, editor, photographer, and columnist. And he has an incredible new book out that we're going to be celebrating. And it's rich with lots of incredible stories that he's sharing in the book about his time as a reporter and photographer, where he's actually rubbed elbows with and interviewed extraordinary people. He's been a professional writer since 1974. He began a 34-year stint as an award-winning editor, reporter, photographer, columnist for newspapers in Nashville, Tennessee, as well as Middle Tennessee. And during that career, he began cultivating friendships with musicians that eventually led to the book. And since 2007, Tim has been a freelance journalist for newspapers, magazines, websites, and an international wire service as well. A regular blogger, he's also the author or co-author of books about his newspaper career, the decline of that industry as well, an alien invasion of a tiny Kentucky town, his mother's death, an ebook about his struggles with government and big insurance after his house was flooded in 2010. And he has also published long examinations on such topics as the Beatles' ties to Nashville, another asking Nashville Cats guitarists to evaluate their contemporaries. He's also served as a journalist in residence at 2 Nashville universities. He is also a 1973 Iowa State University journalism graduate, considers himself a prototypical baby boomer with all the good and bad that entails. And he is really somebody who has had an opportunity to interview a lot of incredible people: Muhammad Ali, Ringo Starr, Kris Kristofferson, O.J. Simpson, Hank Aaron, and many, many other luminaries and those of note over the years. And we're going to talk about some of that as well. We're also going to talk about the new book, which is something quite exciting. There is the cover of the book there, one of the shots in the cover of the book. And there's the actual book, Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky Tonk Heroes. and talk about that. As I mentioned, he's had opportunities to interview some major newsworthy and noteworthy people in this lifetime, from Muhammad Ali to Ringo Starr to Hank Aaron. Yep. Even O.J. Simpson and many, many others, Kris Kristofferson as well. And we're going to talk about some of that. But really, it's the time that he spent interviewing the musicians and some of the life stories and the way that they've opened up and they've shared their stories and their ups and downs in their lives and careers with Tim in such an open way. This is, again, Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky Tonk Heroes, his personal time with Music City friends and legends in rock and roll, R&B, and a whole lot of country. The book releasing in March on the 15th from Backbeat Books, an imprint of Rowman and Littlefield Publishing. The new book is all about his love affair with Nashville, and it puts musical artists, which dates all the way back to 1972, when all at 20 years old, Tim had help from honky tonk legends like Bobby Bare and Shel Silverstein during and after Midnight Salvation of the city. It was the beginning of a lifelong urban romance that Tim would pursue during a career as a journalist, again in Middle Tennessee, interviewing Nashville's biggest stars and developing friendships with musicians of all kinds. With a preface from Bobby Bare and a foreword by Peter Cooper, Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky Tonk Heroes is Tim's love letter and nostalgic swan song recounting his storied musical history of Nashville, as well as the dramatic changes the city has seen over the course of 50 years. The Nashville of today, with 100 newcomers a day from places like Los Angeles and New York, and fresh waves of musicians making up a new modern soundtrack. It's not the same city that he made his home in 1972, for better or worse. Time changes everything, even a beloved American city. But this brisky told and warmly remembered book recounts the countless friends and adventures and anecdotes that capture the essence of Music City across half a century. Kris Kristofferson said of this book, Tim is a wordsmith unlike any other. We've shared some good times together and encapsulates the experiences as if they were yesterday. A truly gifted writer and friend. This book also includes one of the last interviews Johnny Cash gave before he passed away. So it's really something special. You see it on the screen there. You're gonna want to add this to your coffee table books so you can pick it up and enjoy it anytime you like. But without further ado, again, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome Tim to the Jim Masters Show series for the very first time, and I'm sure not the last. Tim, welcome to the show, my friend. It's a pleasure and honor to have you here.
Thanks, Jim. It sure is an honor to be on with you. This was a great thing when I learned that I was going to be on your show.
Oh, it's a privilege. And we're kindred spirits in terms of being a reporter and journalist. I've done that route as well, working in news and sports and weather and newspapers and the whole bit. So we're kindred spirits in that way. And the industry has certainly changed on many levels, hasn't it?
Well, that industry has changed dramatically. I was particularly in the newspaper business. I was in newsrooms for 30, like you mentioned, 34 years. And that led eventually to what they termed graciously a buyout, as they began diminishing their workforce in newspapers. And I was the first wave, but certainly not the last. They've just really, the whole industry wasn't just my employer. The whole industry has shrunk so much. It's too bad, but that's just modern era. I miss the old newspapers. My lifelong dream was to be a newspaper man, and I did achieve that. It just then the newspapers pretty much went away. I mean, there are still some out there, and I have friends who are still doing it, but it's not like it was. I guess nothing's like it was, though.
That's true. Exactly right. What first encouraged you to want to go into writing and reporting and capturing history and sharing those stories and becoming a revered journalist as well as photographer? Were you a kid that always would pretend when you were small that you were a reporter? Like for me, I always had the Panasonic cassette deck, the little portable one with the little mini microphone. And I was always interviewing the family and always capturing. And then eventually that led to, the first camera and then the film. Of course, my father with the 8mm camera capturing everything. I think I got a lot of it from my dad, but then getting into video. For you, what were those inspirations early to want to be a journalist, be somebody who captures memories, historical moments, and precious times in our lives?
It was really it's almost a genetic thing. My mother had been a journalist when the men went to war in World War II, and the women went into the workforce. My mom was in Chicago, and she went to work at the Sun Times. She was covering the cops on the south side of Chicago, the police news and courts news. And then eventually she went into features because it got a little bit too bloody for her.
Yes.
But she did that for a few years while my dad was in the Philippines and during the war and a couple of years after the war. And so that she stopped doing that to raise a family. But she always instilled the love of the word. I cannot remember a time when I didn't want, and I didn't want to be a writer. I mean, I just can't remember. I always told people I was going to be a writer. I was going to be an author. I was going to be a newspaper man. And I always had that interest in talking to people and being around people and learning from them, even as a little guy. And I did have one of those little recorders, and we did play around with that as well to talk to people. And that's just the way it's always been. My mom taught me to read before I got to school, which I don't think is strange now, but back then it was very unusual. And so I was reading, and I remember reading an early version of a child version of Jack London's Call of the Wild. And I read that, and that was really the book. I said, this is what I want to write. I want to write this. I want to write words like this. So that's kind of a long-winded way around, but that's pretty much it. So there's never anything else I wanted to be except a writer.
Who are some of the folks that you saw that were working for newspapers that maybe you also heard on radio and then television that you admired, that inspired you, that you looked up to? There's people on my list too that I've always, whether they were news people or hosts, on air people, writers, journalists that I've always admired. Were there people when you were coming up the ranks that inspired you as well, Tim?
Yes, there were several that inspired me. The sports writer Jim Murray was a great one. The People's Slice of Life columnist, the great writer Studs Terkel, he was somebody I admire. There were several writer people, newspaper, Mike Royko in Chicago, and a few others like that. But also on television, I was really taken by the early work. Well, it was my childhood when I was watching on TV, Walter Cronkite, and Chad Huntley and David Brinkley.
Yeah.
Those guys I watched every day. And I actually started when I was going, I did make, when I went to college, I did actually think that I might go into broadcasting, even though I was writing. I thought I might be into broadcasting because I had such a fascination. By then, it was Dan Rather was doing a lot of live stuff, and all those fellas.
Yeah,
and I
Tom
did
Brokaw, Peter Jennings, John Chancellor, Frank Reynolds. Yeah.
I admired all those people. So in addition to the writers, I liked those fellas a lot, those people. I decided I really wanted to focus on writing, though. I mean, I did some primitive broadcast work. I did some radio in college, but I really wanted to be a writer. That's all I really wanted to be. But I did toy with the idea of, I thought you would write, and you do probably write your own scripts, and I'm sure you do. And I really wanted to be able to write. I really want to be able to write more than project on TV. So I kind of made that choice. I still love the news broadcast. So it's an honor to be with you. I love to watch. Every day I watch the broadcast news and keep track of what's going on, and enjoy the various presentations by the newscasters and the reporters.
And even that world is changing so much with the advent of digital now, right? With online, the television and radio world is sort of morphing, changing, shifting, trying to figure out, what they're going to be doing next, kind of like newspapers and magazines had to do.
Right. The newspapers and magazines are going to be very soon all digital. I believe there are still some actually publications, but most of them have gone to digital by now, or sporadic publication once or twice a week, and digital the rest.
Do you miss that? Do you miss the tangible, physical magazine in your hands? I mean, I've never seen a time, especially with my dad, where the Sunday paper hasn't been there on the coffee table. And, I remember my sister one time, she likes to clean, and she was cleaning the house, and all of a sudden my father was looking for the paper, and she had already put the paper in the recycle bin. And he said, wait a minute, I haven't even finished the paper yet. Yeah. So she had to get it out of the recycle bin and bring it back into the house on the coffee table, because he, cover to cover, it was a thing to really have it. And I love the texture, the feel, the smell of the ink, just all some of the tactile things about flipping through a magazine and going away. Do you miss any of that?
I miss that a lot. I miss the actual holding on to a newspaper every morning and afternoon. I work for morning or afternoon papers. I don't do that now. It's all online, what I look for. But I miss that. I miss the smell of the ink. You mentioned that. This goes back to even my life when I was in the newsrooms. At one point in my career, I was the editor for many, many years. I was the editor who went on through the night, and my job was to actually clear the paper from the press. So the smell, the feel of the newspaper, the actual smell of the press and the ink, and then standing at the end of the press and telling the pressman this was clear enough, let it go. I mean, that's how we did it back then. And that whole thing is a romance to those newspapers that there's not. I mean, I understand digital is the way it goes, but there's not the romance to the newspapers like there used to be.
It would be an event to actually go out of your way to get it, physically get the magazine, get the newspaper. Absolutely. And so were you writing for the school newspapers, when you were a kid? Or tell us about some of the early background for you.
Well, sure. I appreciate that. I actually started out, while I was in high school. I went to high school in the Chicago suburbs, Deerfield, Illinois. And I worked for it was Deerfield High School. I worked for Deer Prince, which was our weekly, I believe it was weekly, student newspaper. And I was the sports editor / assistant editor. And it was just really two of us, the editor and I. And then we had other students would participate with a story or two. So I enjoyed that process because there was a lot of writing and a lot of things. I wrote sports, I wrote a column, I wrote news, what was happening in the student council, all that stuff. So that was fun. And I missed, and I did that for quite a while, for my high school career. Also during my high school years, the local weekly newspaper, our suburb was just across Lake Cook Road from from Cook County. But we had a weekly newspaper, a tabloid magazine type newspaper called the Deerfield Review. And they contacted me to write for them some high school sports, and so I covered them sporadic whenever they needed somebody. I wrote. I'd get paid $10 or $12 or whatever for a story for covering a wrestling match, or I would call them and say, I'm going to the DHS basketball game at Highland Park or where Lake Forest or whatever. Would you like me to cover that? So I did that also. So and that was fun. I enjoyed doing that. It wasn't like a grind. It wasn't a daily thing. It was just a regular occasion. First, see that byline for the first time in a publication was pretty cool. And that was, I was 15 or so, I would guess, when that happened. So that's pretty much where I began. And then when I went to college, I'll finish out this little cycle. When I went to college at Iowa State University out in Ames, Iowa, which again, I went there because they had great broadcasters from Murrow's team. Murrow's boys were working as the teachers in the journalism department. So they were who attracted me out there. And then they nurtured me toward writing. Not that they didn't think I'd do a good job as a broadcaster, but that's what drew me out there. Where to work with these guys. Well, I did work with them. I just didn't learn how to do the broadcast thing with them. But they taught me a lot of things, and I worked for the Iowa State Daily newspaper, where I wrote an alternative. They had an alternative newspaper. This was back in the hippie years, of course, in the late 60s, early 70s. And we published 6 days a week. But the Monday paper was alternative, the so-called new journalism, which was the Tom Wolfe, Hunter Thompson style of stuff. And I wrote exclusively for that part of I didn't write for the rest of the week. I wrote for Monday, and I would write long pieces, sometimes long interviews. Like with Vietnam veterans who'd come back. I conducted long interviews with them and got some stories that I thought were valuable. That I wanted people to know that these guys were human beings, and I enjoyed that. And that turned out to be one of my favorite stories I've ever done. And that was in 1972, probably, or 72. But it was the guys who'd gone and were coming back to school on the GI Bill. And they spoke freely. In fact, I was the first person to get because they spoke freely and they allowed me to write freely, the harshest expletive, I'll say it that way, in the newspaper, that they were, because that was part of the pattern of their language that they had acquired by being in the Army or in the Marine Corps for in country. So I was quoting them directly. So I mean, it wasn't for, it wasn't just to draw attention. It was just because I wanted to show who they were. So that was fun. It was very rewarding. That story was, then a lot of other things that were rewarding that I wrote.
That's incredible. We actually dug up a photo here. Look at this shot.
That was when I was working in the newspaper in Clarksville, Tennessee, and this was in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And two of the fellows on the left were good friends of mine. One of them still lives in Hopkinsville. The other one is deceased. But we were invited, or we actually learned that the Lone Ranger, Clayton Moore, was going to be at the convention center in Hopkinsville, which was about half hour's drive from Clarksville, Tennessee. And so I drove up there to meet the Lone Ranger. This was during the time when he was forbidden from the Clayton Moore couldn't wear the mask anymore, because they were making a new Lone Ranger movie that they were hoping would start the Lone Ranger up again. And so he was barred from wearing a mask. So he wore sunglasses, and we were a group of guys, young journalists, who called ourselves the News Brothers. And we always wore shades to work. And so we thought we'd wear shades we'd go up there and meet Clayton Moore, and of course, a childhood hero. So it was fun.
The Lone Ranger, the real Lone Ranger, right there. Yeah. That's incredible. Here's another cool shot.
That's I appreciate that. That's I worked at the Leaf Chronicle was the oldest newspaper in the state of Tennessee. It still is, although it's really not. Unfortunately, it's not so much of a paper anymore. It's very small. But it was we had pretty good circulation. It covered a lot of counties, and the Leaf Chronicle was founded in 1808. And that's so I was proud of. This is outside of our building. That building is now I think it's the district attorney general's building now or something like that. But at that point, we had a full building with the presses and the newsrooms, the advertising department, a stationery store. And this is just outside, and we were just goofing around with the photographers. That's on the left, a fellow named Robert Smith. In the middle is Toby Tobler. They're both still photographers in different parts of the world. And then that's, of course, that dashing young man on the right is me. And we just were out there goofing around. So I don't even know what we were really pointing at. Probably the spire of the courthouse, which was right across the street from us. That's a long time ago.
And it's almost full circle because today, especially being, journalists and always looking for the story and looking for what's really going on, that could almost be today when you're looking up at some of these weird things that are flying in the skies that they're trying to figure out. Look, there's another one of those things, whatever those things are.
That's right. That's right.
Let's figure it out so we can make it the story for the paper in the morning.
That's right. Well, that had happened back then. We had right in our town in Clarksville is Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is the 101st Airborne. And so if we'd seen something up there, we could have called the helicopters in and they could have shot it down. Like, I guess it was Fallon the other night that joked that the worst profession right now is to be a blimp pilot because you're an unidentified flying object or whatever anymore. So, yeah, that is true.
That's right. Or a large bird of any kind.
Large bird of any kind.
The crows are having a problem, and the hawks.
That's true. That's true. And I may have been misquoting Fallon. I just thought.
Yeah, but something similar, right? Exactly. That is funny. We also, speaking of, having levity, which is always important in life, we dug this up too. Look at that. Part of Sergeant Pepper.
Yeah, that's me in the John Lennon position with the yellow suit on. This was, we were called the News Brothers. There's a long story about that.
Yeah.
We made to deal with the stresses of, we had I'll go real quickly through this. We had two teenagers who were in different cases were abducted and murdered in short order in the Clarksville area. And it traumatized the town. And as reporters, and I was the head of the staff, I had to coordinate the coverage of those murders. And so we did form the News Brothers as ways to let off steam. And we ended up making a film for charity in Clarksville, made a 40-minute movie with a Super 8. And this was before the ages of video. And so it was with Super 8 with a sync soundtrack from a cassette tape. And that was that group there was the News Brothers, and I was Flapjacks, which on the picture you showed, it was Flapjacks Lonely Hearts Club Band or something like that on the drum. And so and so we did the whole Beatles thing and those three fellas and the other Beatles, Jerry Manley, Rob Dollar, and Jim Lindgren from left to right, of course with me on the very left. They still remain part of my life. I don't talk to them very much, but they're still, they're all retired for the most part, but they were journalists forever. So yeah, that was a fun part of my life.
And before we talk about the book itself, you've had this extraordinary opportunity, as I mentioned in the introduction, to interview some of the major newsmakers of the day, like Muhammad Ali. What was it like being in his presence and having an opportunity to interview him?
That was one of the great opportunities I'll never get over. Thanks for the Leaf Chronicle newspaper for sending me. I was the sports editor at that point, and they sent me to they used to go to cover the Masters golf tournament. I said, well, Ali is going to be fighting for his fighting Leon Spinks for the heavyweight to regain for the third time his heavyweight title. And I said, could you give me the Masters money to go to New Orleans and cover that? And they did. And so I went to New Orleans to cover that prize fight against Spinks, and Ali did win. But I was able to spend a lot of time with Ali. The day after the fight was over, Bundini Brown came to the press room and said, anybody who wants to have time with the champ in the morning, he's going to be open. He's going to be in his room at the Hilton at 8 maybe in the morning, or it may have been 9. But they're down by the river there. So anybody was welcome. Well, only 3 of us showed up. I'm sure because most of the sports writers went out and enjoyed themselves after the fight. So only 3 of us showed up. But I spent more than an hour, just the 3 of us, just chatting with Ali. And then I also watched him practice or work out. And then I had the pleasure of his company a couple of other times during my career. I found him to be just a wonderful, generous man. Basically, of course, he was the greatest, as he would tell you, but he was also very humble. And the most striking memory I have from him, other than the fact that he was a great guy, was how soft his hand was on the morning after the fight. You were told by Bundini or somebody not to squeeze his hand because his hands were so sore. So it's just like he was like just really soft. You wouldn't squeeze it. It was just like his hand was basically lying across your palm because his hand was so sore from the fight the night before. But he was a really nice human being. I know there was controversy involved in his life, but he was a genuine and very generous. And I'm just glad that I went up there. I skipped all the bars, all night bars the night before to get a little sleep, and did get up there in time, because if only 3 of us were there for an hour, or maybe it was 2 hours, whatever, with Muhammad Ali, it was a blessing in my life.
Skipping the all-night bars just confirms that you really are a dedicated journalist. You had the task at hand, so we'll skip those for tonight.
That's right.
Maybe we'll toast after I do the interview.
That's right. Well, there were plenty of times when I had plenty of time to do that in my career as well. So yeah.
Exactly. Somebody else, a legend too, and revered, Hank Aaron. Wow.
He was also a very nice man. He was very humble. He was actually covering, he was, after he'd retired, I think it was a year after he'd retired from the Milwaukee Brewers, where he'd gone after his Atlanta stint. And a year after he retired, he was working for Magnavox, and he was at the opening of a Magnavox store in Clarksville, a grand opening. And so as it was open to all the public, I went there, and it ended up, I had a poster I'd gotten at Hank Aaron Day. I went to Fulton County Stadium with my dad and brother for when Hank was still in Atlanta for Hank Aaron Day, and I had a poster of Hank with Babe Ruth, and I asked Hank to sign that. I don't collect autographs. I asked him to sign that, and also once he got comfortable with me, I think he was enjoying talking to me rather than with other people. He was having to peddle TVs pretty much, and he was kind of like, I'm going to stay with this guy who wants to hear my story. And it was kind of like, it was not being mean, but he was kind of waving to other people. But he was actually he focused on me, and I really liked him. And he's still the best ball player, and he was great, one of the greatest people I've met. Wonderful man.
You're going to be shocked by what I have in my hand here. This my father actually got for me, and it's a Louisville Slugger, and it actually has an authenticated gold plate serial number on it. And it was it's a commemorative bat that was part of the Magnavox television company promotion. These were very limited. And this is really a tremendous thing to have, that it's an honor and a pleasure. And the fact that my father, because I played baseball when I was a kid, and he got this for me. We don't play with this.
No,
We
no,
just, but
that's
it's actually the
oh, that's
commemorative
gorgeous.
Hank Aaron bat.
That's gorgeous. Oh,
And
what
it
a what a
has, I know it's hard to see, but it
I
actually has, and you can see Magnavox on there and
can
his autograph. And
autograph.
it's the actual commemorative bat that Magnavox had come
That's
out with. And it
that's
says
great.
Braves versus Dodgers. Pitcher Al Downing, serial number 715. When it hit 715, Braves versus Dodgers, April 8th, 1974. Magnavox, Henry Aaron, commemorative bat, Louisville Slugger. And it's funny you mentioned, Hank Aaron and Magnavox. And when you were talking, I ran to grab it because I have it right to the left. And I said, I got to show him this.
That's
And
wonderful.
isn't this cool?
What a treasure. In fact, a lot of the Magnavox TVs at that time were made out of that color wood. So
Yes.
that's the big cabinet TVs.
Yo, we had those.
Yeah,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
that's a treasure. If you ever decide you can't have it anymore,
Give you a call.
somebody says you can't keep that anymore. I'm just joking, but
No. Yeah.
it's a great
Yeah.
treasure. It's a great treasure.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's that was really something special when he came home with that. And of course we had Magnavox products in the house as well. But and my father was tied in with them through his work in New York. So it just worked out. And it was just, yeah, I mean, the incredible legends of all types, including talking about slipping into the music world, going from sports to music. Ringo Starr. I mean,
Ringo, what a nice fellow. The first time I've interviewed him a couple of times. I was doing stories for the Nashville paper, and I was doing a story. I decided, and they let me do it. I wanted to do a story about Ringo's time. He recorded his first post-Beatles album, which is called Bokus of Blues. Well, he recorded one before that, but he recorded a post-Beatles album called Bokus of Blues in Nashville. It's a country record with all the A-team musicians on it, and it's actually pretty good. It's a country record. Ringo always had he did Act Naturally, which is the old Buck Owens tune. He did country. He loved country music, so I asked. He was coming here to Nashville for a show. And so the Ringo All-Star Band is what it was called. And I contacted his publicist and said, I'd like to talk to him. And I talked to a lot of the men who had played on the session. It was a very long story. I wanted to talk to Ringo about his thoughts about Nashville. The first time, and this only happened twice in my career, but the first time I picked up the phone and it said, "Hello, Tim, this is Ringo." And that was that talk about being caught cold. I mean, I knew he was going to call, but just to
and
reach
did you
over.
believe it was him? Because there's
Yeah.
a couple of times people have had calls like that.
Yeah.
Some of the guests that I've chatted with, where somebody famous calls them directly, and they end up saying, really? Yeah, Ted, stop doing the Ringo voice again. See you later. And then it turns out that it really was that person.
No, I believed it. I had set it up with his publicist, and she was telling me he was going to call. So it was amazing to me. I just thought, well, geez, I just talked to one of the Beatles. So it took, and as I said before, as you said, an unrepentant baby boomer, the idea of spending a few minutes, it wasn't a long interview, a few minutes on the phone with Ringo Starr was really good. He was the only one of the fellas I got to interview, but I did a very long piece that ran in. This was actually in my freelance world. This was not. I did a piece for the Tennessean, then I did another long piece later on that whole session and more that a local alternative paper allowed me to write. So I interviewed him 2 times. Once for a regular preview story with nice quotes in it, and once that went in depth in talking to the musicians and him. And a lot of those musicians are friends, and some of them actually turn up in this book. They were in the Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky Tonk Heroes books. A lot of them, there are several of them that actually turned out to be big music stars on their own, and so I maintained friendships since that day.
You even had an opportunity to interview way back before any of the drama, O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, yeah. I was. Uh, he was repping Acme Boot Company, which is no longer in existence, but it was a large boot manufacturer in Clarksville, Tennessee. It was the largest industry in Clarksville at the time, and they always had a celebrity run their Dingo line. It was a Dingo line of boots, and that's I don't have Dingos on because they were more expensive. Mine came off the seconds rack at their outlet store, but he like the year before he did it 2 years. Joe Montana did it, and then the year after he did it 2 years. Then John and June Cash did it. So I mean, so they would come, and these folks would come to Clarksville for the annual sales meeting from all over, international meeting from these boot men from around the world, and so his job was to come and just hang out with the salespeople and entertain them. I was able to get about an hour of his time, maybe longer, to just sit down and talk to him. He was not aware that this was at Clarksville Country Club. He was the first. The times have changed. This is way back in the 70s. He was the first black person to be a participant. He was playing tennis out there at Clarksville Country Club. Other than, of course, they had a lot of black people who worked there, but I don't think he even. I told him that, but I don't think that even sunk in very much on him. But he broke a barrier there himself. I know that there's a lot of controversy, a lot of horrible things about later in his life, but he was to me. I did interview him once earlier for a real quick interview. The first year he did Dingo, then I got the special treatment for the whole hour. He's a very kind guy. I liked him a lot. We went to after that we went to a local restaurant for later on. I liked him very much, and I was a big fan of him as an athlete and as a pitch man. This, of course, was in his pitchman days, and
Hertz rental cars, and
rental cars. Yeah, I loved his Hertz commercial, and he was in those Naked Gun movies, and he was actually he was a pretty funny guy in the movies. So I was, although I'd read other things about him, so I wasn't completely caught off guard by the later behavior and tragedy, the murders. But I've not been able to reconcile the fellow that I knew to the fellow that's still out there looking for the true slayers of his wife, ex-wife, and her friend. And I guess he has the great ability to turn that on and off. Very charming guy. I'm making no excuses for him, obviously, but
sure,
a personal charm, which, of course, people loved him until everybody loved O.J. Simpson nationally. He was a beloved figure until the murders.
So all that happened, the trial and everything. Somebody else that is beloved that you've had an opportunity to chat with on multiple occasions, and he actually wrote some beautiful things about your book. Kris Kristofferson, another great legend.
Kris, when I moved to Nashville and first time in 1972, and I was 20, my parents had relocated. Their company relocated. My dad's company relocated to Nashville, so I would go out in the evenings Nashville was nothing like it is now. It was a lot more real and kind of rough and tough down along the music row and along Lower Broadway. Now it's real glitzy and neon-y. But one of my goals was to meet Kris, and because I'd fallen in love with his writing. But when I was in Chicago, I started buying his records because I read about him. So I saw him perform many times, but I finally got to meet him in 2003. He was in in town for he'd been in town for Johnny Cash's funeral, and then for a special that they were doing tribute to Cash, and Kris had been the eulogist at Cash's funeral, and I tried to talk. I'd interviewed him on the phone a couple of times, and his wife and he told me that if they came to Nashville sometime, that we could get together. So I stayed. This was before John died, so I stayed in contact with them. And so when they were coming to Nashville, his wife and he contacted me and said, this would be a good time, and if I could see him on Sunday. And so I picked him up at his hotel in Nashville and drove him. He'd not been to Music Row. He'd gone off to be a movie star and everything. He'd not been on Music Row, which is where the records used to be produced and where he used to hang out. It was what flavored his music. It had been a rough and tumble place with great honky tonks. He hadn't been there in 30 years in the daytime. So I took him down there, and with his son, John, he had a 16-year-old son who was named John after Johnny Cash. I took Kris down there to Music Row, and we walked along Music Row. John was tagging along because he decided he didn't know enough about his dad, so he was going to do a video project for his school in Hawaii, high school in Hawaii. But we just walked along Music Row and showed Kris. Kris was seeing what was there now and then reflecting on what wasn't there. And he said he missed, he basically was, he wasn't despondent, but he was sad to see how much had changed and how it become so corporate and not the favorite tavern. And it had been mine also, was a place called the Tally-Ho Tavern, which is where one of his best, on the Silver Tongue Devil and I album, he writes about, one of the lines is, I took myself down to the Tally-Ho Tavern to buy me a bottle of beer. And then it goes on about temptation and life and things like that. The Tally-Ho was where he worked for like $80 a week and all the beer he could drink while he was a singer songwriter. So it was no longer there, but it was a pretty cool place. I'd been there. So I wanted to show him what was there now. And then we saw a lot of other things that weren't, a lot of things that weren't there and what was in its place. So then in the years since, and that was 2003, we've had many occasions to be together. And I'm very good friends with Kris and with his wife, Lisa, who's a wonderful woman. And so we communicate. Mostly it's by email anymore. But we communicate. And he's a great man, and I'm proud to call him a friend.
Somebody else too, Sheryl Crow.
Yeah, Sheryl. That was this was when I was freelancing. In between the time I got bought out by the newspaper and the time that I started writing this book, I was freelancing, and a publication contacted me and said that they wanted a piece done on Sheryl Crow. So she lives here in town, about 5 miles from here. She has a large piece of land with longhorn steers on it, grazing on it. And so I went over and I did the story, and I spent maybe 2 hours with Sheryl. Very, very nice, very genuine person. And we don't stay in touch or anything, although I would say hello to her anytime I saw her. But I enjoyed meeting her, and there's a lot of human being behind the musical facade. So of course she's a lovely woman also, but her music is very important. So I was happy to spend, and that actually was picked up. That story was picked up and went international because she was putting out an album. It was a country album. She was going to try country. The country thing didn't go so much for her, but she was trying a pure country album.
That's incredible. Like you say, you've had an opportunity to meet so many incredible people and see them for who they are, and they open up to you and share their life stories and their experiences and triumphs and tragedies and just everything. And you've been able to compile your incredible experiences in this book. Let's talk about it. What was some of the inspiration for penning this book, Tim? And congratulations on it. It's no easy feat, putting something like this together. It's probably been a labor of love and years of journaling and, memory making along the way.
It was a labor of love. Jim, I was fortunate, but not fortunate. I'd wanted to do this book for quite some time. I started, this goes back into my newspaper experiences. At one point, early on, even before I was at a newspaper when I first was in Nashville, I met Bobby Bare and Shel Silverstein. This was in 1972, and Nashville was getting ready to cover all these downtown. The downtown was all brick roads, brick roads, and they were going to asphalt it all over. Of course, it needed to. The bricks would come up and everything, but it was part of progress. So I decided one night, late after midnight, I'd been down there probably for a few hours before midnight. I decided to go and rescue some of the bricks before they were covered up the next day. And so I just I had an old 72 Plymouth Duster or something like that at the time. And I just pulled it up at the corner of 5th and Broadway, which at that point, it's the middle of everything. There's millions of people there all the time. And it's nothing like it was then. It was pretty desolate, particularly at 1 or 2 in the morning. But I pulled my car up there. It was next to now there's a big fancy nightclub there, but right there it was next to a peep show. There were peep shows and prostitutes and honky tonks down there then. It was pretty rough, but pretty interesting. But I pulled up next to there. I thought that if there was anything illegal I was doing, I didn't want to be in the middle of Broadway, but I did it right there almost at the intersection of 5th Avenue South, which is downtown, the heart of downtown. And I took a screwdriver out of the trunk of my car, and I just started popping up bricks or using just with my fingers because they were loose. And as I was doing that, 2 fellas walked out of the misty darkness. There was not a lot. There weren't big buildings down there now. A lot of empty parking lots and things. Just were walking along out of the darkness, and they said, "Hey," something like, "Hey," to the effect of, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm saving bricks." And one of them said to the other, "Well, that seems like a good thing to do. We'll help you." And so it turned out to be, it was Shel Silverstein, the great writer and songwriter, and he was a regular in Playboy magazine as a writer back then, famous writer, and did a lot of great songs. And Bobby Bare, who was his best friend, and Bobby had done a lot of Shel Silverstein songs. Shel wrote A Boy Named Sue, which of course was a Cash song, but he did an awful lot of songs. Drop Kick Me Jesus, The Goalposts of Life. I think that was one of his too. That I may be missaying that one wrong, but he did a lot of great songs. I'd look up Drop Kick Me, but I'd probably lose you here. But he did a lot of great songs, and I recognized them mainly because of Shel, because I knew what Shel looked like. He was bald-headed, had a beard and dark beard. He's very distinctive, and I knew his appearance. And then when he said Bobby, I knew it was Bear. And so they helped me for a while. They helped me load up my trunk with bricks. I've lost track of the bricks. I don't know where they are now. But at the time, it was important to me to save them. Then they left me and went across the street to Tootsie's Orchid Lounge. So that was my first, and that's detailed early in the book when I talk about Bobby Bare. But that was the kind of incident where, and we became friends later, much later. And I talked to Bear at least once a week. Now we're very close friends. But then later on, I'm going to jump now about 30 years. I was promoted from where I was the state editor at the newspaper at the Nashville Banner, and I was in charge of hard news coverage outside of Metro Nashville, the cops and stuff, and also state government and national government coverage. And so, and then the city editor, of course, handled the crime in the city and the city council. So I had a fairly large staff, and we were good. I was a good editor, and I had a great staff, wonderful staff. But at one point, they decided that the paper reshaped the newsroom and decided they want more news coverage, news angle, news flavor on their features, on the entertainment writing. So they moved me over there where I was entertainment editor. Now I'll make it quicker now. I'm sorry, I've rambled to get to this point, but the problem was that I had an entertainment writing staff that they worked nights. I came in at 4:30 or 5 in the morning to work my pages. My staff worked at nights, so they only had, they wouldn't come in until about 10 in the morning because they were working nights and doing a lot of things. They worked hard. So if something happened early in the morning, I had to do it. So if it was an obituary, a musician who died, I would knew that we needed to do a story obituary. I would do it. I didn't know how to even begin when the first one I got, but I just looked in the phone book, and back then they actually had phone books and you could actually find people in it. And I thought, well, Chet Atkins would be a good one to start with.
Let your fingers do the walking.
Yeah, I still have an old phone book here, but I called Chet, and he picked up his phone at his office. It was early in the morning, and I introduced myself. I had seen him and met him before at performances, but he didn't really know me. And I said who I was and what I was doing, and I just needed to get comments from him, plus any people, any names and numbers he could give me who would help flesh out this obituary. And he did. And then he became a go-to for me. So I was calling him, but I was adding my list up. So I talked to Chet, and he said, well, you need to talk to Mac Wiseman or Earl Scruggs or whoever. And so, and he would give me their numbers. And so I would do that. And I kept a list of people and their phone numbers. Later on, and I had to chat a lot. In fact, he joked me that he and his wife joked that one day I was going to be calling, and he wouldn't be able to answer because I'd be calling about his obituary. Of course, he couldn't help me with that one.
Right.
But they laughed at the fact that he was my first stop.
Do you remember what Carl Reiner said, the legendary comedian and producer? Speaking of obituaries, his famous line was, every morning when he would get up, he would check the newspaper to see if he was in the obituaries. And if he didn't see his name in the obituaries, he'd have breakfast.
That's good. He was funny. That's funny. Yeah, that's good. And that Carl was great. Yeah. It became, so Chet was my go-to because I had been a news guy, and I didn't know these fellas, but I became accustomed. I knew them, and so I began collecting this list. And I did a lot of obituaries because my guys would come in. They'd flesh them out and make them longer, but for the succeeding editions. But I had the first edition one, but I began talking to people, and they became I kept this list of phone numbers. And as these fellas got older, I would make sure, and country music was changing, and a lot of these fellas were not so prominent anymore. So and some of them were in ill health. I made sure that I would call everybody on this list, which got to be a fairly lengthy list. Everybody got a call from me every 3 weeks or so, everybody on that list. And we would only talk, maybe I'd talk for 3 or 4 minutes, but I just said, it's just Tim, just checking, see how you're going, how you doing, how's your wife or whatever. And I just was thinking about you. And that was me being selfish because I liked these guys, but it also was, I really, the basic reason for it was I didn't want them to feel forgotten. And so that's really the genesis of this book. When I got the book, and you've had it up, the Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky Tonk Heroes book. When the pandemic came in March of 2020, I lost all of my freelance work, every bit of it, and because everybody was belt tightening, and in all the publishing, all the magazines and newspapers and wire services I worked for, in an attempt to cobble together a freelance career for what I'd been doing for 13 years at that point, after my newspaper days ended. All those jobs, every one of them just dried up simultaneously. And rather than stew, which I have a tendency to stew, but rather than stew about it, I decided, well, I'm going to take advantage of this time, and I'm going to write this book. And so I started in March 2020. First thing I did was list all the people I wanted to write about, and then put them in order of how I wanted to write them. I treated this as my full-time job. That my goal was each week to finish a chapter on somebody. And so I did 34 chapters, and it took most of a year. So I didn't always meet my 1 week goal. And it was I was going back through. I had interviews with these guys. In the meantime, yes, I jumped over the fact that during my freelance times, a lot of these fellows who I was just contacting for fun or to reassure them they were important, I ended up doing feature stories for some of my employers. Something for the Nashville Ledger. I wrote a column for them, and about every 6 weeks I did one on one of these old musicians. It was a slice of life column. Excuse me. So I had interviews with these guys, and I'd had interviews with the other when I was at the Tennessean. I had those to draw upon. I had permission from all of them to reprint my work if I wanted to, but I didn't do that this time. I may yet do that sometime, but I used that work to go back, and I had a lot of great quotes. Most of these folks were deceased at that point when I was doing it, but I had written down quotes, and I had these special times with them sitting in their homes, like George Jones and
tell us about some of the folks.
Yeah, it was just George Jones. Of course, everybody knows George Jones, I guess. He was a really nice fellow late in life. I know he had a wild early life. They made it into a TV series this year. But George was a really nice, gentle old fellow, and he had a second wave or third wave of success with an album called Choices, and with a song called Choices. I don't think the album was called that, but it was a good song. And I had known George. I'd talked to him on other occasions, and I'd actually helped them rescue. So there was some thievery of some bronze eagles that had been on their fence gate. So I'd helped them find those before. So we knew each other. But I went out to his house and spent the better part of a day talking about. And it was in conjunction with this record, but also was mostly just about him and who he was now, and maybe some of his thoughts from before. I had been when he had driven out, he'd fallen off the wagon at one point a couple of years before, and he almost died in a wreck. My entertainment writer wasn't available to cover that, so I covered it as the entertainment editor late on a Saturday night, and so I began a relationship with George, and we ended up. The last thing he said to me was he walked me to my car. Well, he said, Tim, wait. And I came out there, and he opened my door for me and said, you get in now. And he let me in the car. And then he said, I want you to come back. I owe you a steak dinner sometime. Unfortunately, I never was able to collect, but we did. He was a really nice man. And I sat with him while he was with his dog, and he was chain chewing chiclets because he didn't smoke or drink anymore. And watching Bonanza and I think the High Chaparral and Gunsmoke on some cable station while we were talking. I liked George a lot, and I was proud to be his friend. Cash, I knew Cash pretty well, but I never got to the point where Johnny Cash and I were friends, but I'd been to his house for a party, and June had showed me around their house, his wife, June Carter Cash. And I talked to John a few times, and he knew who I was, and I put in with his publicist, his local publicist. His national publicist was Lou Robin, but he had one of his nieces, Kelly Hancock, handled his local stuff. And so I would keep calling her and say, whenever your uncle feels up to it, I'd love to come out to the house and hang out with him for a while. And she said he'd like that, but I'd have to wait till he feels better. And so that was fine. So we talked, and I would call regularly and just say, first of all, how's he doing? He had ill health late in his life. And And I promised her that, I was not going to focus on. He was really prideful about his personal appearance, and he'd gotten old and frail. And so part of the reason he didn't want to do interviews, I understood from Kelly, was that he didn't want people to focus on how he looked. He wanted people to focus on who he was and what he had accomplished. And I told Kelly I wouldn't focus on, I wouldn't focus on his appearance. I just wanted to talk to Johnny Cash. And so finally I called, and she called me, I think, I don't know, one way or the other. I kept these calls up, and finally Kelly told me that he wanted to see me based on what I'd said, because he wanted just to talk to me. He was making these wonderful raw American recordings back then at the end of his career. And if I would just come out to the house the following Monday, after he got back from a quick trip to the West Coast to see Rick Rubin, who was producing those records, those late records, then I could come out there and hang out with him. Well, that weekend, instead of going to the coast, he went into the hospital and subsequently died. So I never got the opportunity for what I had hoped would be a long day with Johnny Cash. And I expected that it was because of his health that it could well end up to be his last interview. And I wanted to capture that human being because I write about people. I love people. And I wanted to capture that. And I was never able to. I mean, I've written about John. He has a chapter in the book, he and June, because I did have a lot of occasions with them. But I didn't do the one. The one, he got sick and died before I could do the one that would have crowned that. But that was, and other people I probably should mention. Well, I don't know who you're interested in. So, the Bear thing, like I said, I still talk to Bear every week. He's one of the last ones left from that group of people from that generation. He's 87. I think he'll be 88 next month. But he and his wife live. They're self-sufficient, live in a nice home up about in a city called Hendersonville, about 30 miles away. He's a great friend. He refers to me as his best friend, at least I'm one of his best friends. And I've written, and Charlie Daniels, he became a friend. His politics late in life were not mine, but he became very, very much to the right. But he was still a wonderful guy. So that's fine. We didn't have to agree on that. He's a wonderful guy. And our history together went back to a time, and this is in the book, a history went back to a time in 1976 or so. And I was in Clarksville, and Willie Nelson was coming to the Austin Peay State University gym to do a concert. And I was getting, and so nobody else knew who Willie was up there in the newsroom. So I'm sports editor, but I said, I'd love to go cover that. And so I went, but I kept on getting thrown out. I had credentials supposedly at will call, but I kept on getting thrown out by somebody with the promoter. And so finally I was out back at the gym. I'd walked all the way around, and then this great big guy said, what you doing, son? And I said, well, I'm not able to get in here to do my job. And he said, you just come on with me. So this big fella with a big hat on, Charlie Daniels, a big bearded fella, put his arm around me and walked me past the promoter guy who'd been throwing me out, and just said, this fella's with me, leave him alone, basically. And he walked me to my seat, which was very close to the stage front. And ever since then, I had a soft spot for Charlie right up, and we talked frequently right up until the time he died. There are a lot of people in here, of course, that maybe people. Earl Scruggs, is, of course, the great banjo player. He's in here, and he and I had a friendship just based on going back to my years of calling, thanks to direction of Chet Atkins. I had he was one of the people I got to know, but mostly I knew his wife, Louise, who was the brains behind the operation. She ran the business, and so I talked to Earl Scruggs frequently, and then when Bob Dylan died, when Bob Dylan didn't die yet. When Johnny Cash died, I wanted to get a quote from Dylan, who of course it was one of Cash's great friends. And so I called Louise, because Earl and Dylan had done a lot of things together. So I called Louise, and she said, Tim, if anybody can get Bobby to talk, it's me. So let me work. She worked all day long. Finally, she gave up well into the evening. She was calling. Then finally, she apologized, just saying, he doesn't talk to people much, but I thought that I could get him for you. But Louise was a good friend. I don't know how much more you want me to ramble on here, Jim.
Maybe just some other quick names to give people an idea about the book. And what's the takeaway? What do you hope people, as you share your experiences in this book, what is the takeaway? What do you hope people are left with?
Okay, I hope that they're left with a lot of knowledge, that they've enjoyed the read, and that by the time they get done, they'll feel like they know these people and that they've known them and that they mattered. And that's what I was trying to reassure these fellas through the whole way. The book is designed to be read front to back. There's all there's a subplot about the change in Nashville, and Nashville has changed, where we have 100 people a day moving here. I think you mentioned this at the top, and the city has grown into this major metropolis, but it's lost a lot of its character. Now I can't go against progress. I liked it better before, but I'm old. It's all skyscrapers and condos, and very little regard for a lot of the preservation of what was here, and subsequently and in the same way, these musicians have been forgotten along the way. And so when I'm telling the story of Nashville, and there are a lot of stories in this book about the musicians, and we're talking, you'll understand my thoughts about the change in the city. And again, it's not, I think I still love Nashville. It's my home, but it's not the city. It's not the city that these guys that are in this book, it's not the city that these guys pretty much built. And the people I've got in here, and I also hope that people read it front to back, but it can be read chapter by chapter. But if you read it front to back, there are enough references preceding the chapters are placed strategically to carry you, so it's one full story, but you can just pick out one chapter. But I got Cash, Bobby Bear, Eddie Arnold, who was a great friend. I used to hang out at his office. Little Jimmy Dickens, who was a great opera star. Chet, of course, is in here. Then there's some R&B people who you probably wouldn't know, but Frank, I did a lot on there's R&B music in Nashville. There's a subtext of back when Music City was indeed the great boiling pot, or however that phrase is, of music. There was a large rhythm and blues scene over on Jefferson Street. So I actually worked a lot of those fellas in here too, because they became my friends again. So a lot of people, Mac Wiseman was probably, and he's not R&B, he's old country, great flat top guitarist. And I was with him he would call me all the time, and I'd go out to his house just because I loved him. He was the first guitar player with Flattened Scruggs. Dixie and Tom T. Hall, loved them both. Waylon Jennings is in here, Grandpa Jones. I'm just reading them. So Stonewall Jackson, Charlie Daniels, I mentioned. Jimmy O.T., who was a drummer, and he talks about his time as a drummer with James Brown and Little Richard, and also his friendship with the Beatles, because he toured with them. Of course, I mentioned George Jones. There's Billy Cox, who was the bassist for Jimi Hendrix Experience in the later years before, toward the end of the Experience. And then he also went on to be with Jimmy and the Band of Gypsies. And Billy talks about Jimi Hendrix's performing roots, which are here in Nashville. This is where he learned his stuff. He wasn't from here. Roy Clark, who was on Hee-Haw, Slim Whitman, who you probably would remember, but I'm not going to read all of them, but there's an awful lot of great. Dwayne Eddy, the great rock and roll icon from the 50s, probably best known for the theme from a TV show called Have Gun Will Travel. But and Peter Gunn. He did his bass work. A lot. That's a lot. There's a
Incredible.
lot more. There's a
How
lot.
long did it take to write it?
It took the better part of a year. I did. I'd go back and I'd read what I had written about these guys, which all of them had written something. It may have been just in a story, or may have been a full-blown story, it may have been 2 or 3 stories. And then if they were still alive, which most of them weren't, I would also call them. But and then I would go research. I'd read what other people had written about them. I'd read, I'd research their music. I'd listen to their music, to in most cases to get me inspired for that particular chapter. And then I would just start writing, and I would come to my office, which is down the lower level of my home, and I would come in here every morning at 8 or 9 at the latest, and I'd put in a full day, go upstairs to eat lunch, and then put in, like, I treated it like my job for that close to a year. And then that year, when that year ended, and I wrote it. It was written rather. Then I sent it to publishing companies, and first pitched it to a couple of different places. And then I was told there's a great writer named Peter Guralnick, who's famous for his books on Elvis, and he's a great music writer, music biographer. And Peter I know pretty well, so I contacted him just to say, who do I go to? I've never gotten this is a national book, I think, but I've never done that before. And he sent me to a fellow who had worked as his agent. And that fellow, just to get some information, that fellow couldn't help me because he was only doing the books for the big house, the big, the Random House type stuff.
Major publishers, yeah.
Major publishers. But he said that over at Rowman and Littlefield Backbeat Books, which is a pretty significant publisher, they sometimes are looking for something different, and they do music books. And so he said, go try them, and I'll send them a note also that you're coming at he read the whole book. I'd sent him the whole book. So you're coming at my recommendation. And then so I sent them, they wanted the whole book, and they took it. And then about the last, it's been almost a year and a half, has been the editing process, securing, there are a lot of photographs in this book. You've showed some of my old photographs. There are an awful lot of photographs of musicians that haven't been regularly seen. They didn't want the publicity shots. They wanted shots of the guys in their lives, or that were family books, either performing or with their family or whatever. And I had to track those down, which was a lot of fun. That took a good while, though. And then they had to sign off on all rights and things like that. But there are a lot of there's at least one photograph in here from everybody who's in the book, and then some of them, there's 2 or 3, and there are photos from my career I've taken that are in here as well. Like I have that first night with Willie Nelson, shot from the stage front of Willie back in '76, I think it was. That's in here, and I took pictures of other fellows when I was doing columns for the Nashville Ledger or whoever, or as a freelancer, and I would take pictures. So some of mine are in there as well.
Cool.
And I got great photographers participated too. Local guys who I knew were award-winning music photographers, John Pillow and Bill Stieber. They're in there. I don't want to name a whole lot of other names, but there's a Kerry Mark Passeroff, who's a great music photographer, works out of the East Coast. He's in there, and there are a bunch more, plus just people who found pictures to send to me.
Available at Amazon as well, and in March, starting in March, right? Mid-March.
Starting in mid-March, March 15th, it's supposed to be published. It's supposed to be out there. It is available for pre-order now. Amazon or almost all the book. They have
platforms and websites,
and I have a website, Ghianni.
Yeah, that is Tim Ghianni.
That they can go to that, and that'll lead you to the publishing houses. I mean, the book,
the links, yeah. All the links. So this was a labor of love, Tim. Congratulations on it.
Thank you.
It sounds like a phenomenal read for our viewers. I mean, you're just really scratching the surface of the book, naming some of the names of the people. There are many others that you talk about from your experiences with them, with all the photos and behind the scenes, and you put it together succinctly in the book. This was really fantastic. Really appreciate all this time. Somebody here that usually pops in towards the latter part of the show. Just wanted to say a quick hello. Mr. George Burns is here.
Hello, George. I'm glad to see you, George. I'm a big fan, big admirer of your continued work.
Got his cigar. He's got his cigar as always and his red hanky. He's down below with his martini as always. And my aunt collected, serious collector of dolls, had a whole room, thousands of dollars worth of dolls. This was one, got passed down to me, and he always pops in to say hello on the Jim Masters show. So there's George. You can't go wrong with George, right?
Can't go wrong. If I had the time, I'd get I have over here a Chet Atkins. When he died, his wife gave me his he was a woodworker by trade, by hobby, whittler basically. And I've got his hand carved nameplate that
cool.
she said she thought I'd want that. So
that is amazing. There's the website, everybody. TimGhianni.com. TimGhianni.com. There's the spelling and everything. Tim, this was terrific. I hope you enjoyed the time with me as much as I have with you. And
I enjoyed it.
And the show met whatever expectations that you had, and we'll definitely keep the porch light on for you. You're welcome back to join us on the Jim Masters show anytime. Spread the word about our show. We would love that.
What an honor, and you're great at this, Jim, and what an honor. I know I think I rambled on too long.
No, not at all.
What an honor to be on your program. Apologies if I attributed the wrong songwriter someplace in there. Just trying to. It's all coming from my fairly clouded memories up here. But thank you so much. It's been a real blast, and I hope some of the folks will want to get the book. I think you'll enjoy it. I would like you to get through the 300 and some pages, and come out with a few tears. There are some tears in there, and then a lot of laughs also. So, and then maybe they'll buy some of these old guys' music.
That's right. Exactly. Support the music itself too, through the reading of the book. Congratulations again on the book, my friend. And again, truly enjoyed the time with you. And thanks for being so real and authentic and open and expressive here on the Jim Masters Show live series. Spread the word about our show, and we'll keep connected and have you back. And again, hope you enjoy the time as much as I have with you.
Well, I've loved it. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. You be well, and you take care, my friend, okay?
Thanks, Jim. And I do appreciate you calling me your friend. I'll take that seriously. That's important. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the viewers already have called you a lovety, Jim Master Show lovety. Is that pretty cool too, huh?
That's pretty cool. It's lovety.
That's it. I tell you. You be well, okay? We'll
Thanks,
chat again soon. And again, congratulations on the book.
Thanks. Hope to talk to you again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
absolutely. Jim. You be well.
Thanks, Jim.
All right. Tim Ghianni here, award-winning author and a reporter, editor, photographer, columnist, gracing us with his presence here on the Jim Masters Show live series. So good to have him here, and so good to have all of you here as well. I need a drink of water. Definitely. Yeah, or a nice hot cup of coffee or tea. Didn't get a chance to make any of that yet. It's been such a busy, busy day, as it always is around here all the time. What a great guy, huh? Here is the book, Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky Tonk Heroes. A really extraordinary conversation we had. And the book, again, is something quite special. And there's some stories in there that you may have never heard before. Again, it's all about his love affair with Nashville and its musical artists, dating back to 1972, when at 20 years old, he helped, really have an opportunity to connect with some of the music legends of the time. And he's expressing that in this incredible book. storied musical history of Nashville is celebrated, and so much more in it. There it is again. And you can pre-order at the time of this show right now. If you watch this episode a year from now or 2 years from now, because we archive everything on our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, then the book is already out. But really cool stuff, and a great guy. Again, he's been doing this for decades, and he's interviewed some of the most notable people in our history. Tim Ghianni here at the show, award-winning author, reporter, editor, photographer, columnist. Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky Tonk Heroes is the book. Amazon and all the usual places where you can get it. And we really appreciate him stopping by and sharing his story with us. What a story. What a story it is, huh? We appreciate all of you being here as well. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to give it a like on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel that you're watching is Jim Masters TV. You can see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes we've done. There's a thumbs up icon there. Click that, the like icon. And of course, make sure you click the notification bell as well. The notification bell is a little bell icon on the YouTube channel. That way that you can get notified about all the episodes and everything we're doing here. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. When you do that, when you subscribe, which costs nothing, you click the notification bell so you get the updates, and you give the episode a like, and you drop a comment in the comment section. That helps our show expand and reach more of the Lovity viewers all around the world. We love that, and we appreciate when you do that. And YouTube does too, because then they take the episode and they blast it out to more people when there is that interactivity. So we appreciate that. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Really, really a very special conversation here. Spread the word about our show. Continue to share the links on all of your social media. And for those of you who have been doing that, we really appreciate that. You guys are absolutely the best. We've got amazing people here on our show. Around here, we don't say goodbye. We say, see you later, ciao, cheers, slancha, hasta la vista. We say shalom, sayonara, moilup, cheerio, take care, be well. Want to let you know, also coming up, we have one of the most recognized and revered and beloved chefs in the world, the incomparable Jacques Pepin. I've interviewed him multiple times on public television, on PBS. He's done over 12 public television specials and series, over 32 cookbooks, taught for over 40 years at Boston University, also Culinary Institute of America, extraordinary culinary educator and instructor, a brilliant artist as well, and revered, legendary television personality. He's been on PBS for over 40 years. He's done cooking shows galore, including with Julia Child, the one and only Jacques Pepin, joining us on the show, which is going to be absolutely amazing. Looking forward to that coming up as well. So you can find about all these episodes of our series on our YouTube channel and the Jim Masters Show live series. Thanks for being here, everybody. We really appreciate you being with us. It's always a blast and a pleasure to have you here. Again, if you enjoyed this episode, we thank Tim for joining us here on the show, and we thank all of you for joining us here on the show as well. Take care of one another, be good to one another, and celebrate life as we celebrate you here on the Jim Masters Show live series. Take care and be well. Again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share that lovity, and we'll see you on the next episode. I'll be right here waiting for you. Now, that's for the folks that watch the shows when they're on. But if you're watching this archived, stay right here. Another episode comes up. There's hundreds you can binge watch. Guests coming in from Broadway, Hollywood, television, film, music, stage, sports, comedy, culinary arts, inspiration, just about everything. Music, you name it. That's what we do here on our talk show, the Jim Masters Show Live. We'll see you again soon, all right? Take care and be well. And cheers.